So one of the things that should become clear to you at this point is that Jesus makes it very clear that he has come to the earth to die. That's not a misprint. It's not a missaying. Jesus has come to the earth to die. And in fact, in Mark, up until this point in Mark chapter 10, this is the third time that he's told his disciples, and it says in Scripture that he said it to them very plainly, which means that Jesus isn't mincing words, which means that Jesus isn't trying to speak in some sort of hyperbole or some sort of something else. He's literally saying, I'm going to die. And then as we get into this text as we will read, in this version, he gives a lot more detail than in the first two. So each single time he tells the disciples that he's going to die and then he's going to rise again, he gives them more and more detail. In this version of the story, he tells them that not only is he going to die, he's going to die in Jerusalem, which is a big deal because that's the holy city. And then he also tells them also that he's going to be rejected by both the Jews and the Gentiles, another wrinkle in there, right? And then he also uses very descriptive and violent words like flog, that he's going to be condemned to death by them. And then at the end of the account, as we will read in a little bit, he tells them why he came and the reason why the cross, from his own lips and his own words, why the cross is necessary. So if you have your Bibles, let us read first section of this, and then we'll read the rest of it a little later. But we're reading from Mark chapter 10, verse 32 and verse 34. And pay attention as we read to the words that he uses to describe what's going to happen. Again, the third time the disciples have heard this, and each time with increasing detail. They were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them. And they were amazed, and those who followed were fearful. And again, he took the 12 aside and began to tell them of what was going to happen to him. And saying, he said this, "Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles. They will mock him, spit on him, and scourge him or flog him and kill him. And 3 days later, he will rise again." And if you then go back down to verse 45, he says, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. A couple of things we need to pay attention to here. Jesus tells us in verse 45, right? He says this, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." The word when he says, "For the Son of Man came," or has not come to be served, tells us that Jesus is indeed God. It's a way of him being like, I didn't just pop out, somewhere out of nowhere. Like I wasn't created. I've come. I've seen all this. I've known all this. I've come to do something very purposeful. He has a reason. And then he adds this little statement in there, "For the Son of Man came to give his life as a ransom for many." Now, the word ransom, the word for in here, for many, is the Greek word anti. And anti is basically, it sounds like auntie, but it's not. It's basically a word that can be translated in a couple different ways. Not only is it a word for, but more rootedly, it says it's instead of, or in place of, or a substitution. So Jesus has come to give his life as a substitute instead of. And the word for ransom here is the Greek word lutron. And lutron is the word that basically means to pay the payment in order to free a slave. So as you know, back in those days, in the Greek days, people had slaves. The history of our country here in the United States is based upon slavery. And basically for a slave to become free, someone had to pay the payment to the master that I'm going to free this slave by paying this payment. And so what Jesus is saying very clearly is that he's come to serve, but to die as a substitution for the payment that it requires for us to be free. I've come to substitute in your place. And the reason why this is all necessary, as we've learned in the last couple of weeks, is that indeed all this is necessary because of what? Because the sin that we're dealing with is of a cosmic scale. The sin that we're dealing with is much bigger than we could ever realize. And so it requires the payment. And the payment, in this case, is the cross, and the cross of Jesus Christ. So let's take it a little step further then, shall we? The question I want to ask is, why does Jesus have to be the ransom, right? Have you ever thought about that? We talked about why the cross is necessary and things like that, but why does Jesus have to substitute in our place? One of the questions that I always had when I was little is I always wondered, why didn't, if God is love and God is all these things that we always say that he is, why doesn't he just forgive everybody? Wouldn't it make it simpler? You might wonder that with your parents sometimes too, right? If you do some bad things, if you misbehave or whatever, sometimes you would think, why can't my parents just say, it's okay, I forgive you, and then be on with it? But a lot of times there's a punishment, there's a consequence, right? Sometimes you wonder, like, why? And particularly if God is so big and so great, why couldn't he just say, done, forgiven, all of it? So I think one of the ways that we look at it and we say, the reason why Jesus had to go to the cross, I think some people like to say is because or despite of God's love, right? As if to suggest that as Jesus was and God was doing this thing, they realized, oh no, you know what, this problem that we got on our hands, it's much bigger than we ever thought. So you know what, I'm going to have to go and die. But I think the proper statement here is that Jesus has to die on the cross, not despite God's love, but because of God's love. Because of the way God loves, Jesus had to die on the cross. Think about that for a second. Let me repeat it. Because of the way God loves, Jesus had to die on the cross for you and for me. Why is that? Part of the reason is because all real life-changing, life-altering, deeply felt and rooted love is what Tim Keller calls a substitutionary sacrifice, which is basically, I sacrifice myself for you. Did you catch that? All real love is substitutionary sacrifice. All real love is a substitute for something. Now, think to yourself for a second. Does anyone know, have you ever tried to love somebody that you think is perfect and has everything together? Do you know people like that? I feel like I know a few. My friend Paul, although he's not real perfect, but for Paul, my friend Paul, many of you met him at the summer retreat, right? He's like so easy to love. Like, he's just easy, no problems. He's just a really amazing, amazing dude. If you know people like that, loving them is what? It's easy. It doesn't really take much from you, does it? It doesn't require a whole lot of effort. Loving them is easy, right? And if you know anybody like that, you might want to invest in a couple of those people because they really do bless and encourage your life almost continuously and constantly. Every time I talk to the guy, all I do is come away with is being blessed. But have you ever tried loving somebody that's difficult? Somebody who has needs? Somebody who's broken? Somebody who has emotional scarring? Somebody who has painful physical scarring perhaps? Someone who's got a lot of needs? Have you ever tried loving them? Is it easy? Why is it hard? Have you thought about that? Because in order to love them, it costs you something, doesn't it? Maybe for some of you, this is your parents. Maybe for some of you, this is your sibling. Maybe for some of you, it's a friend in school or whatever. But if you ever try to love somebody who's in need, it's really hard. It takes something from you. You have to substitute something, transfer something. And in many ways, the only real way to love somebody who has really needs, who's needy, who has issues, who has hurt and pain, is to take their issue and their pain and to transfer it onto yourself. No? If you were ever to try to love somebody who's hurting and you try to love them by just being around them, but without actually taking on any of that on yourself, it'll never work. Or take, for instance, parenting. I have 3 children, very young ones. In order for my children, and your parents, I think, understand this too, in order for your children to become the people that we all wish them to be, it's going to require a lot of sacrifice on my part. My freedom, a lot of it goes out the door. My time, it goes out the door. My needs, a lot of times it goes out the door. I need to read to them all the time, even if the stories are boring as no end. Connor has this thing where he wants to read the same story over and over and over. Mason had the same thing when he was that age, and even now. And it's to the point where Mason would memorize the entire book, even though he can't read, and yet he would still want me to read it over and over. Connor brings me the book. Read, please. One more time. He goes, again. Read it again. Again. It requires that. Why? Because that's how they learn to think. That's how they learn to operate. That's how they learn things. It requires sacrifice. Kara is a little baby. If my wife, if Christina, isn't up all night taking care of her, waking up when she needs to and feeding her, Kara will not survive. Having children is one of those things parents should know, but as a young parent, I'm learning this continually. It requires about 20 years, if not more, of good, honest, and earnest sacrifice for them to become the people that we want. And as one person puts it, it's very striking. Either I will sacrifice those needs or they will sacrifice those needs, one or the other. And if I don't sacrifice it, guess what happens to my kids? They don't become healthy, operating, loving people. It's become strikingly apparent to me that for my kids and for my children to become the kind of people that I want them to be, I need to do the work to make sure that happens. I'm strikingly reminded all the time that whenever, if my kids have issues, guess where they got those issues from? Right here. All real love requires substitution. There's no way to get around it. It requires a giving up and a sacrificing of freedom of things. And so if you understand love in this way, of doing what's best for the other person, even though it costs you a lot and you know it's going to cost you, then you understand why God does what he does. Think of the people that you think really, really love you, truly, truly love you. Who are those people? They're the people who know you inside and out. They're the people who take all of your shame, all of your baggage, and bear it on their shoulders with you. That's how you know they love you. Others, they may make you laugh, they may know you, they may quote unquote hang out with you, but if they don't really know who you are, they don't really know your heart, then you know they don't really, really love you. And you keep it from them. Why? Because you don't want them to be burdened, right? Love of the real life-changing kind is a substitutionary sacrifice. There's no other way to get around it. We all know that you can't turn a blind eye to evil and or pain. And even when we know that something must be done. And so Jesus then knows that something must be done. And that something is indeed the cross. Because forgiveness, as we've talked about many, many times in here, isn't a simple, I forgive you. Forgiveness requires that I pay something to forgive you. Forgiveness requires that God pays something to forgive you of the debt that you owe. It is indeed then why the cross. It is indeed then why love requires a ransom. And this ransom for us is Christ, then on a cross. Now, as we go and then learn more and more about the cross, it's interesting that Jesus says it 3 times. And after each and every single one, the disciples have a very interesting reaction. I don't know if you remember, the first one, what happens? Peter goes and outright rebukes Jesus and says, no, can't be. And then Jesus calls him Satan and tells him to get behind him, right? And on the second one, if you read in chapter 9, after Jesus says, I'm going to die again, what do the disciples do? As they're walking along the road, they're arguing amongst themselves who's going to be the greatest. Now, in this third time, you would think, by now, the disciples, right? They're smart people, we think, right? That they would get it by now, right? We have that saying in the English language, third time is a charm. You would hope. Maybe they didn't get the first time. Okay, fine, understand. Second time, okay, I get that. But third time, by now, you seriously, blockhead, you would think you would get it. Third time's a charm, but they don't. And after the third one, in which Jesus gives the most amount of detail, here's a little story about James and John. I'm going to read it for you, right? It's in verse 35. James and John, the 2 sons of Zebedee, came up to Jesus saying, this is, remember the context, right after Jesus says he's going to die and get spit on and flogged and scourged and then killed on the cross, right after that, James and John pull Jesus aside almost, and they say to Jesus, Teacher, we want you to do something for us, whatever we ask of you. Do you ever ask your parents to do something for you like that? Mom, Dad, I want you to do something for us, for me, whatever I ask. No. You try to butter them up first, get them feeling good, and then maybe you sneak it in maybe, and then, they give it to you. But they come right forward. Jesus, interestingly, doesn't go, oh, you little scoundrels, right? Have you not been listening? But he doesn't. He takes the question, and he says, do whatever we ask of you. And then Jesus says to them, okay, then what do you want me to do for you? In verse 37, they said, grant that we may sit, one on your right and one on your left, in your glory. Now, what do they mean by that? For you sports fans out there, what do you think a football player or an NFL quarterback, whatever, what do you think is their glory? What's the moment of their glory? Huh? Scoring a touchdown? Greater than that. Winning a Super Bowl. Have you ever seen the picture The New England Patriots just won recently, but have you ever seen the picture of when Tom Brady first wins it? He's looking out onto the crowd, and he's got this look of like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I just did this. And he's like, touching his head, and he's just like in disbelief. That's the moment of their glory. So what James and John is asking, when you are on the throne, when you are at the highest and the peak of your power, can you make sure that me, James and John, the two of us, forget the rest of those guys, but the two of us, that we sit right on the left and the right hand. We want to be the right and the left-hand man when you take power, when you make everything right, when you get to the glory on your throne. They're jockeying for position. For whatever reason, they don't understand what Jesus is about to do. And so Jesus, understanding that they don't know, he says to them, you do not know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with a baptism with which I am baptized? What's the moment of Jesus' greatest glory? I think I heard it over here. What? No. What is the moment of Jesus' greatest glory? The cross. James and John, without knowing it, are asking, hey, Jesus, can we sit or stand on the right and the left of when you're in your most glory? If they knew what they were asking, they would literally just ask Jesus, hey, Jesus, can we get crucified with you on the left and the right? And Jesus knows that they have no idea what they're asking. And he's like, oh, you don't know what you don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink? The word for cup in Hebrew and throughout the Old Testament is meant for judgment, God's judgment. And then the word for baptism that God uses, or Jesus uses all the time, is about this being immersed, fully immersed in something. Jesus is saying, are you ready to die and take the judgment that I'm about to take? To be immersed and full of evil and hate for the moments that I'm going to be? Are you ready for that? And James and John, like bumbling idiots, they go, we can. Well, we know that they really can't. They're jockeying for position. Here's a situation where Jesus is talking about death and his cross, and yet they're trying to sit there and jockey for position because they think it's all about power. They think it's about victory and celebration when it's about the cross and death and blood and tears and a grave. They don't get what they're asking. And so what Jesus does then is to teach them a little bit about what love and glory is. And I think when we read this, for some of us, we might be asking, dude, I cannot believe. I used to think this way. The disciples, they seriously must be the biggest idiots in the world. Like, how are they not understanding that this is not what Jesus is about, right? I don't know if you're like me, but that's the way I think. You would think the third time, again, they would get it. But the question I think we should be asking ourselves isn't, why aren't they getting it? The question is, what are we missing? What are we missing? Because if you and I are honest, or at least I'm being honest, if I'm honest with myself, I'm no better than the disciples. I'm worse than they most of the time. So what am I missing? What are we missing here? On the most basic level, I think one of the things that they're missing is they're not understanding what it means, what the cross means. I have a confession to make to all of you. Understanding what the cross means is really hard. So many of you have gone to church all your lives. You see the cross every single week. Some of you maybe wear it on your earrings, or you wear it on the necklace, or whatever the case might be. But we don't understand the magnitude and the craziness of what the cross is. It's really, really hard. But when we first start to really realize it, I think that's when we start to understand what's really, really going on. But what is then really, really going on? So then Jesus tells us later in the passage, right? He says, and this is when he teaches them, he says in verse 42, you know that those who are recognized as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great men exercise authority over them, but not this way among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you shall be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. This is what he's saying. He's like, you want power? You want to be of influence? You want to make a change in the world. You want to make an impact. You want to make a difference, which is, I think, what all of us want to do. He's saying you're going at it the wrong way. There's a story in Jeremiah 29. There's a story where Israel, the nation, right, has just been defeated by the nation of Babylon. And right after that happens, right, they've been defeated. The Israelites are in exile, and it's like basically being in prison under somebody else, right? They're being tortured, they're being killed, and all these things. Jeremiah in 29:7, basically God comes to Jeremiah and tells the people this. He says, pray for the success and the well-being of the city in which you live in. Pray for it. Jesus is basically saying that city, the people that just ruined you, the people that just destroyed you, the city that's ruling over you, pray for them, love on them, pray for their success. Now, think with me for a second. Let's just say you were in a battle with somebody, right? I don't know, you were battling for, top 5% in school or valedictorian or, first chair in some orchestra thing or band thing or whatever. It's just something that you're competing against somebody with. And then pretend that somebody beat you and defeated you so that you got nothing. It's not about being first or second. It's all or nothing kind of a thing. And they beat you, right? You lost to them. They defeated you, and they're in glory, and they're doing all these things, and you want to be where they're at. And then all of a sudden you came to me because you're so distraught. Let's just pretend, right? That you're really, really upset, and you're coming to me and you're saying, Pastor, I don't know what to do. This person just ruined me. I think my life is over, yada, yada, yada. And then I look at you straight in the face, and I go, pray for him and her so that he or she may do well and prosper. What would you think? Would you be happy with me? I'm never coming back to this church again. You suck, Pastor. I'm not. That's what Jesus is doing. That's what God is telling the Israelites. Pray for the city of Babylon that just destroyed you. Make sure that they prosper, because when they prosper, you prosper. And you're understanding, wait, how does that make any sense? That's what Jesus is saying. All the people who have authority, all the people who have power, they lord, they exercise, they make sure that they take their authority and they put it over people so that they follow, but not with you. Whoever wants to be great shall be last, and whoever wants to be a master of all shall be the slave of all. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Right? Life for us is different as Christians. It's not the same. It is why the cross is what it is. Let me read for you a quote from Tim Keller, and this is what he says. He says, for you, God says, the route to gaining influence is not taking power. Influence gained through power and control doesn't really change a society. It doesn't change hearts. I'm calling you to a totally different approach. Now listen to this. Be so sacrificially loving that the people around you who don't believe what you believe will soon be unable to imagine the place without you. They'll trust you because they see that you're not only out for yourself, but out for them too. When they, the people, voluntarily begin to look up to you because of the attractiveness of your service and love, you'll have then real influence. It will be an influence given to you by others, not taken by you from others. Do you see? The disciples are wondering, James and John are wondering, Jesus, why don't you just defeat these Romans? Why don't you just take them, crush them, make them nothing? And when you do, Jesus, because I know you can, because I know you're God, when you do, make sure that I'm right with you. I want to be right where you're at. I want to enjoy every last bit of the glory that you have. And Jesus saying, you don't understand. You want to be a difference? You want to make an influence? You want to make an impact? You want to change people? You want to love people? You want to do something in the world? That's not the way you do it. You don't gain influence by having power and making people follow you. You gain influence by loving them so sacrificially, serving them to the degree that when you disappear, they'll be like, where did they go? I can't imagine. This is not working because that person is missing. When others give you the influence because they voluntarily say you deserve it, that's when you've had real impact, is what he's saying. It totally flies in the face of everything that you're doing. We're taught, if you want to have an impact, you got to get to the highest place, be number one, be top, be successful. But Jesus is saying, no, that's not the way it's supposed to work. There's a department of psychology called the psychology of happy. Basically, a little while ago, people wanted to find out what makes people happy and how do you become more happy? Everybody wants to be more happy. Do people want to be more sad? Would you like to be more happy? So, psychologists decided to start looking at why people are happy and why certain people aren't. And when they started looking at it, they realized that certain things we didn't understand. They realized a couple of things, and I'm quoting here from an article. It says, happiness can be measured objectively and over time, so you can actually know when people are happy and not happy. Okay? There's a strong correlation or relationship between happiness and the experience of meaning, right? We have very many misconceptions about what makes people happy, and there are things that we can do, voluntary and intentional activities, to increase our levels of happiness and meaning. It's basically saying this. One of the things that we misunderstand about happiness, they say, is that if you're after wealth and power and pleasure, that'll never actually make you happy. Why? Because the cycle is never ending. You just want more and more and more and more of it. So if you're seeking after pleasure and power, then you're always going to be seeking for more power and more pleasure in this never-ending cycle, and you'll never actually be happy. Then the way to be happy, the psychologists say then, is to actually do things that give you meaning in life. That's the big thing. Meaning equals happiness, they say. And so what they're saying is that the things that give you meaning are actually not the pleasure-seeking things. It's not success. It's actually giving of yourself, volunteering for others, serving others, sacrificially loving others. Psychologists, not Christians, psychologists have deemed that to be more happy, you give. That when you give, you find meaning in giving. And when you find meaning in giving, then you become happy. Now, all of that sounds really, really good. Finding meaning sounds really, really good. But let's take it a step further. Then what the psychologist will tell you, right, that the way to be happy, the way to be loved, the way to understand life, and the way to live it well is to make sure you sacrifice, that you live an unselfish life so that you can be happy. Would you agree? Is that what the psychologist is saying? That if you want to be happy, you should lead an unselfish life so that you can be happy. But I find this very interesting. Because to me, when you say it like that, and it kind of seems to make sense, to say, hey, Allison, if you want to be happy, make sure you live your life unselfishly. Then Allison's going to be like, oh, if that's the way to be happy, then I'm going to live my life unselfishly. But to me, that's a selfish way of living life. Because you're unselfishly living so that you can be happy. Which means the end goal is so that you can be happy, which is a selfish goal. Are you making sense of this? You get it? It's why a lot of times when we come to church, I don't tell you to do things because you have to. It's even the same thing with Christianity. If you read, if you pray, if you give, if you serve the church because you think that's going to get you into heaven, or you think God's going to be more happy with you, or you think that's going to make you a good person, then you're not doing it for the Lord. You're doing it for your own good means at the end. And this is where Jesus flips everything. If you do things because you can get something in the end, then that's not real love and that's not real sacrifice. That's not going to change anything. If you help an old lady across the street because you want everybody to know that you're the kid who helps old ladies across the street, you're not doing it to help the old lady across the street. You're doing it to help yourself. So then, how do we make sense of all of this? How do we approach life in the way that God does, the way that we're supposed to live? True love is different, friends. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but if you ever see it, the one thing that you'll most likely say is, that's beautiful. There's a sheer and genuine and unadulterated beauty when it comes to love and grace. So if you love for the attractiveness of the beauty and the goodness of the love, then you're doing it in the way that Jesus does. That's how we make life changes. That's how we understand Jesus loves us. That's how we know when true love is real. And so, friends, the thing for us to do in this time is to look at God. I don't know where you're at right now. We've been talking about the cross for a very long time. We've been talking about the cross and what it all means. We've been talking about Jesus and what it all means. And lately, for whatever reason, in terms of in my life with people around you in this room, but also outside of this room, in the relationships that I have, there's just a lot of brokenness that I see all over the place. A lot of hurting and a lot of pain all over the place. And one of the primary questions that's being asked all the time is that, or the thing that gets people to be in those places is, I don't feel like I'm loved. I don't feel like I'm worthy. I don't feel like I'm worth anything. I don't feel like anybody cares for me, that I'm all alone. That I have to do something or be somebody. And what Christ is saying is, that's not the way it's supposed to be, child. I love you, not because you have to, not because I have to, not because I get something out of it. And actually, in fact, when I go to the cross, I'm going to suffer a lot so that you don't have to. Life is not meant to be lived the way that we're all living it. You give, not because you get something, but because that's the beauty of life. You love because that's the beauty of life. You don't love somebody because you want them to love me back. That will never get you anywhere. But when you look at the cross, I hope, and this is what you'll see, and this is why the cross is so difficult for us to understand, and this is what I hope you're getting. When you see that somebody, anybody, it doesn't matter who it is, but when you see that somebody is willing to die for you when you've done nothing for them, then that alone should make you realize that you're worth something. In fact, not just something, everything. And for us, I think it makes even more sense. For the disciples, it might have been not as much. But for me, I've never actually physically met Jesus. I've never done anything for Jesus, if I'm really being honest. I've never done anything to make him happier or make him better. I may have thought I have, but I really haven't. But he died so that I can live. If that doesn't tell you that you're worth something, then I don't know what does. If that doesn't tell you that you're loved, then you're worth something, that you mean something, that you're beautiful, then I don't know what does. Christ is saying, I have to die for you, because when I do, you live. I have to substitute my place for you so that you can live and be free. Is this what the cross means to you? Is this where we're going? Is this what the whole thing means? Or are we chasing, struggling, dying, because we just want somebody to love us, when all that we're called to do is to look to the cross and to know that on it, the God of the universe declares to the world that each and every single one of you and I, we are worth everything to him. That you are worth somebody's blood. That you and I, we will indeed be in places of glory because of what Christ has done. Friends, I hope as we journey and as I invite the praise team back up and as we finish, I hope you'll see as we journey closer and closer and closer, whatever it is that you're going through. And this is sometimes the beauty and the craziness of youth ministry, is that all of you, and many times, if not all, like most of you, if not all of you, you guys are going, all of you, through something. At this age in your life is one where, not just this age, but always, but this age is one where you're wondering, who am I? What am I worth? Am I worth anything to anybody? Am I loved? Am I really cared for? Does anyone find me beautiful and worth it? Well, I'm here to tell you, God says you are. And as we draw closer and closer to the cross, I want to ask all of you, is this the way you see the cross? Is this what this all means to you? On the real, seriously, keeping it seriously, just 100% real, on the real, all this, if it's not about the cross, if it's not about all of that, then this really is, for most of us, meaningless. But the God of the universe says that I can't just say I forgive you, because I have to show you, I have to do it, I have to forgive you, I have to sacrifice, I have to substitute myself for you so that you don't have to and you can live. Is that what you're here for? I earnestly pray it is. I earnestly pray that this community can be one in which we can show that to one another. Yeah, we're all broken. Yeah, we all have things. We're redeemed by Christ, and in that way, we're all redeemed people. Each one is beautiful in its own right. So friends, I invite you to continually draw ever closer to the cross, to come to the foot of the cross in which God says to you, I love you, unconditioned. Not because I have to, but because I want to. So that you can live and have life and have joy and have goodness. So that you can then pour forth into another person's life so they can have goodness and joy and life. So that this room may be indeed a room full of beautiful and loved people, living life together in joy and in peace. So I invite you, before the praise team begins to play again and before we sing a few songs as we close, I invite you to come into a place and to really think, to consider. Whatever it is that you're feeling, be honest with yourself. It's only just you. Is this the God you know? Is that what you see when you see the cross? That you see a statement as bold as ever that says, God of the universe, the God of the universe, the one who created everything, that God would love you in such a way that he would take your place so that you can live forever and ever. No questions asked, no ifs, ands, or buts, just the way that it is. And if it isn't the way you see the cross, then I pray and I hope and I encourage you to ask God to give you the eyes and the hearts to see and to hear and to know that you are beautiful, that you are worth everything, that you are loved, regardless of what anyone else tells you, that God of the universe tells you so. So take a moment, reflect, ask, think, and draw close. As we finish in worship, I pray. Let me just pray, and when we're finished, we're just going to dismiss you and go to fruit baskets. But as we close and as we finish, and as the praise team closes us out, I hope that you would see the cross and you would know it, but more so than you would experience the life-changing love of God who takes your place. For we, his people, are beautiful, and his love and his grace is more beautiful than anything we know.